Great. Okay, well, welcome everybody to our voter registration training. The League of Women Voters, the City of New York, we are a nonpartisan organization whose purpose is to promote an informed and active citizen participation in government. Our mission is to expand our outreach and increase all New Yorkers' participation in their local communities and government through civics education, the vote, and issues advocacy. And we welcome you all here today. First of all, what we're going to be doing today is talk about how to register voters, whether you're doing your own voter registration drive or you're joining us on Constitution Day or at any other of our drives. This is what this training is all about. So, getting started. First of all, we want to emphasize to everybody that we're not just here to encourage people to register to vote. We're here to encourage people to actually vote. And this requires thinking more globally about the creation of what we call a voting action plan. So what we're going to start with this evening is what is a voting action plan and how can we encourage folks when they register to vote to think of it this way. We're going to go over the basics so that you can help to demystify the process of voting for the people you come into contact with when you're out there doing a voter registration drive. We're going to review important information that you're going to need to successfully register and inform voters about this upcoming election and all upcoming elections. And we're going to share useful resources and help you prepare for your voter registration drive. We're also going to think about ways to really help the disenfranchised and the cynical voter to really understand that we're here for them too, and that their voice does matter. So, important information, where do you get it? Here are some websites that we're actually going to be talking about this evening. You might want to take a screenshot of this because these are sort of the go-to websites when we talk about helping people create a voting action plan. The first one, obviously, is the Board of Elections, vote.nyc. We're going to be referring to this over and over and over again this evening. This is sort of like the one-stop shop website to give you all the information you need for your voting action plan. In vote.nyc, you'll be able to find voter lookup to find out if a person is actually registered to vote. They can check their status. They can check their poll site. We'll talk about that. And then we have the two important League of Women Voter websites. The first one you see on the screen, Vote 411, is the National League's site platform where you will find nonpartisan information. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And then, of course, our website, lwvnyc.org, where you're going to find all the information you need and obviously ways to help us and volunteer in your community. So if you want to take a quick screenshot of this, that would be a good idea. I'll pause for a minute if you want to. Okay, so getting to the voting action plan so that we can help voters when they come to us during a voter registration drive. We want to make sure we can really help them understand that it's about voting. It's about your action plan. So first of all, the basics. A person has 3 different ways that they can register to vote here in New York City. The first way is online through Department of Motor Vehicles. If the person has an updated New York State driver's license, learner's permit, non-driver ID, they can just go through that website, Department of Motor Vehicles, and they can update by clicking on that they want to be a registered voter. Another way, of course, is now we have the opportunity for people to register to vote online through vote.nyc, the Board of Elections. And they can use their phone. They can go right to Board of Elections, vote.nyc. They can register to vote online. And of course, the third way is the good old paper form, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. The paper form, you're going to have them at your voter registration drives. And it's also something that if people want, if you don't have access to these that the Board of Elections distributes, it can also be printed out, again, from vote.nyc. So these are 3 easy ways to help people just get registered to vote. Then we need to know when and where. When you think about a voting action plan, you've got to think about not just, am I registered, but then when can I vote? When are the deadlines? Where can I vote? So there are important new deadlines and new laws that are actually going to help us, help people really understand what they need to do. So first of all, when we talk about important dates, we have to talk about deadline dates, because if people miss the deadline, they don't get to vote in this election. So we want to make sure everybody understands that. The new law is that people can apply for a mail-in ballot, more about that in a minute, or their absentee ballot 10 days before the election. So that's October 26th, which is also the first day of early voting, and also the last day a person can register to vote. More on that in a minute too. So we know early voting is 10 days, starting October 26th and ending on that next Monday, which would be November, whatever the Monday is. I mean, not Monday, sorry, Sunday. And then no voting on that Monday. And then, of course, election day on that Tuesday. And so it's very important that everybody keep track of these dates. Now, of course, the dates are also at vote.nyc, so you can look there and see the timeline for what all of these deadlines are. Next, in a person's voting action plan, we want to make sure that everybody knows that there are also 3 different ways to vote in New York State, not just 3 different ways to register, but 3 different ways to vote. The first way is brand new, and it's mail-in voting. Now, mail-in voting works very similarly to absentee voting, which is still an option. But mail-in voting, you don't need an excuse. In mail-in voting, you have to fill in an application, just like you do if you want to vote absentee. And again, that's a 10-day requirement, 10 days before the election. You can actually request that application. You can fill it in online and complete it online, which is great. Or you can fill it in paper form and mail it in. Again, make sure you follow the deadline for that. But mail-in voting is for anybody who wants to vote from home. No excuse needed. Now, if a person is disabled and wants to vote permanently from home, they can use the absentee ballot, because there's the option for a permanent that you will always receive an absentee ballot. Mail-in voting, you do have to request a new one every single election. So that would be another difference. Second way a person can vote is early voting. Go to the polls. Again, it starts 10 days before the election. It runs for 9 days, but the hours are different. So again, go to vote.nyc, double check, because some days of early voting, it might be from 8 to 5. Other days early voting might be from 7 to 9. So you need to double check what the hours are. Also, your poll site for early voting might be a different poll site from traditional election day voting. So we want to inform our voters when we're talking to them. Again, check at vote.nyc to check where your poll site is if you choose to vote early voting, because it may very well be different. Then the third way to vote, of course, is traditional election day. Remember, with redistricting, The lines have changed, so that poll site might be different than where people are familiar with voting at before. So we want to remind people, always check where your poll site is. So that's important. Now, of course, they're going to get in the mail, they're going to get their voting card that they can use. They don't have to use it, but they can. That'll have the poll site on it. But we also want to remind them to use vote.nyc. So very important to check that and help people so they know where to vote and when to vote. And of course, these 3 ways to vote, how they want to vote. Next step in your voting action plan is to know what's on my ballot. What's on my ballot and who's on my ballot. And again, the information is at vote.nyc. Now, I checked this morning and the sample ballot is not posted yet. So we have to wait a little while, be a little patient for that. I did not see the sample ballot yet. Now, it's important to know that when people see their sample ballot may look different from their friend's sample ballot. And of course, we want to remind everybody that because we are represented by where we live, I could literally live across the street from you. And if that's a different congressional district, if the line comes right down the middle of that street, our ballots may look different. So we want to remind everybody that your ballot is for you, for the people who are going to be elected to represent you where you live. So that's important. Vote 411 once the sample ballot is posted. Vote 411 is going to give people the opportunity to look at the ballot and also to see information about the candidates. More about that in a minute. When you think about making your voting decisions, there are also, besides candidates on the ballot, there are going to be propositions. We have this year on the November ballot is going to be a statewide ballot proposal. It's going to be Proposition 1, and it is the New York State Equal Rights Amendment. The League of Women Voters has endorsed this proposition. It's important that when we're doing voter registration, however, that we do not tell people our opinion about it, because during voter registration, we are there to help people register to vote, have them understand their voting action plan, but also understand that even though as a nonpartisan organization, which we are, we do take positions on issues. But during voter registration, that's not what we're there to discuss. We're there to tell folks, this is going to be on the ballot, do your research, see what you think. Now, in addition to the New York State ERA, there are going to be 5 New York City charter propositions. All of these are going to be on the reverse side of the ballot. Remember, in New York, the candidates are on one side, and then you flip the ballot to see the propositions on the reverse. So we want to encourage people not only to remember that, flip the ballot, but also to do the research. And again, they can go to Vote 411 to do the research about this information about these ballot proposals so they can make informed decisions. If you have time when you're talking to voters, it's also a good idea to talk to them about partisan versus nonpartisan information. And when you think about the difference, the League of Women Voters and many of the organizations that you all represent, we are nonpartisan. We are not going to tell people which candidates, political parties to vote for. We're simply providing information to encourage that person to become a voter. So nonpartisan information can be obtained from the League of Women Voters at Vote 411. The person can also be encouraged to look at the different party platforms for the different political parties, thinking about their concerns and their issues. What do you care about? Look at the candidates' positions on those issues. Look at the candidates' websites. Where do the candidates stand on the issues that you are concerned about? Look for those key words. If you care about gun control, if you care about climate, look on the platforms of the candidates and you can make informed voting decisions. Watch a debate, watch a town hall meeting. That's going to give you information that you can then process in a way that's really nonpartisan because you're looking at both sides. So that's really important when we talk about what's on the ballot to help people make their voting decisions. Then we've helped people with their voting action plan. We've helped people figure out that they are a registered voter. We've helped them figure out where they're going to vote, when they're going to vote, how they're going to vote in terms of which form of voting, and then how they're going to make their voting decisions. Oftentimes, voters have other questions, and we can be there for voters to help them figure out these other parts of their voting action plan. So, for example, some of the most frequently asked questions have to do with the questions you see here on the screen. People often hear the term affidavit ballot and they want to know what it is. The affidavit ballot in New York is really the ballot that a person is going to use at the poll site for a couple possible reasons. First of all, if they're not in the poll book, but they know, they're convinced that this is their poll site. They have checked on poll site. They know they've looked it up. This is their poll site. This is where they belong, but they're not in the book. They can request an affidavit ballot. Once the Board of Elections verifies that this is truly their address and they truly are registered to vote, that vote will be counted. Another reason for the affidavit ballot is our new law with early voting. A person now can register to vote on day one only of early voting. They will use the affidavit ballot that will register them to vote because all the information they have to provide. And again, their vote will be counted when it is verified by the Board of Elections. So in other words, the affidavit ballots get counted with the absentee and the mail-in ballots. Some people want to know, well, how do I vote if I have a disability? And again, we can reassure them every poll site in New York has an accessible entrance. And it's important to know that when they go to their poll site locator at vote.nyc, it will tell them where the accessible entrance is. It may be around the corner, it may be a different entrance door, but it will tell them where their entrance is to vote in person. Also, of course, we have the ballot marking device, which is the special machine that anybody can use. Anybody can use it, but a person with a disability can definitely benefit from it because a person can, you put your ballot in the machine and it will mark for you what you indicate. And you're indicating it with either buttons or a rocker pad or even a sip straw or a foot pedal. So it's a way to really help a person with disabilities be able to vote in person if they so choose. Some people ask, well, what am I supposed to do when I get to the poll site? And, you think if you've never voted before, that's a big question. So to encourage people, you go up to the information desk or you have, again, vote.nyc. It'll tell you your election district and your assembly district, which is abbreviated to EDAD. And that's the table that you're going to go to. They're going to hand you a ballot. They're going to hand you a privacy envelope. You go to a privacy booth, so everything is private, and you bubble in completely. It's very important. We need to remind voters, you don't just put an X or a check. You have to bubble it in, color it in completely for your voting choices. What could go wrong? Somebody might say, well, maybe I make a mistake on my ballot and I bubble in the wrong person. That's okay. You bring it back to the table. They will give you a new ballot. Don't throw it out. You have to give it back because every ballot is counted as those would be voided, of course. So we want to make sure that everybody understands that it's okay to make a mistake. You bring it back to the table, they will issue you another one, and you can do that. So let's talk about your voter registration drive. When you're thinking about your drive, whether you're working with the League, Constitution Day, or any other time with the League, or again on your own, you want to make sure that you have all the supplies that you're going to need, which would include the voter registration forms. It would also include making sure you had a stack of the absentee ballot and the mail-in ballot applications. You want to make sure you have clipboards, blue or black pens, because the forms have to be completed in blue or black ink. You want to have signage, right? Signs and QR codes, and location, location, location. Think about where you're standing. If you're doing voter registration drives and you want to have all these conversations that we've just talked about to help people come up with their voting action plan, you don't want to be somewhere where people are rushing back and forth. Like standing at the top of the subway is probably not a good idea. People are in a hurry. But in a place where people are willing to linger, where people are willing to just kind of talk to you for a few minutes. And if you're standing there with a clipboard, rather than sitting behind a table, it's much more interactive, and the potential voter is much more likely to interact with you. You also got to think about things like your comfort. Make sure that you've got on a good pair of shoes, because you're going to be standing for a very long time, and you want to make sure that you really are comfortable yourself so that you could really provide help to the potential voter. Make sure all the things we've just talked about that you have on your phone, or if you're going to have let's say maybe you're going to bring an iPad or something like that with you, that you've got vote.nyc ready to go. If somebody asks a question, you know where the answer is. And again, thinking in terms of helping the person create their voting action plan and saying to them things like, oh, okay, you're registered. Let me help you find your poll site for early voting. Let me help you find the hours of early voting. Let me help you go to Vote 411 to look at some nonpartisan information. So for you to have that information at your fingertips is very, very helpful. And it's all right there. You want to make sure that you are representing yourself, if you're with the League, of course, in a totally nonpartisan way. So we're not wearing any signage on ourselves to support any particular candidate or any particular political party. Now, if you choose to do voter registration with a partisan organization, let's say with a political party, that's fine, but that's different. You'd be wearing a totally different hat to do that. Any work you do with our organization or any other nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, we have to be scrupulously careful about how we represent ourselves in a very nonpartisan way. We're encouraging people to vote, to have a voting action plan, and we're not in any way influencing them from any of our own personal feelings. Because again, our goal is get out the vote. That's what we want to do. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we do this. How do we engage with people? We want to really engage them. So that means eye contact and talking to people. Try to get beyond the yes or no questions. Very importantly, a person must re-register to vote. Even if they're a registered voter, a person must re-register to vote if they have moved, even if they've just moved across the street, or if they've changed their name, they have to re-register. So we want to make sure people know that. To just say to somebody, oh, are you a registered voter? If they say yes, that's not the end of the conversation, because we want to say, oh, have you moved recently? Or did you change your name? So we want to make sure that we catch everybody we can possibly catch. Also, a person who is a registered voter can, if they choose, change their political party affiliation. More on that in a minute. So we want to give them opportunities. If they need to re-register, we want to give them that opportunity. Also, we might want to say to them, oh, would you like information about who's on your ballot? If they're already registered, let's help them with those other steps of their voting action plan. So they might need help going to vote.nyc or Vote 411 to see their sample ballot, because maybe they don't know who's on their ballot. So they may be absolutely registered, but we want to give them that extra hand to make sure they have their voting action plan. Of course, we're going to face people who have barriers, and we need to help people break through those barriers. So, for example, somebody might say, I don't know if I'm eligible to vote. Very often, that person is someone who may have been previously incarcerated. New York State, we have a brand new law that we're very proud to have supported, and that is anyone who was convicted of a felony and is now out of incarceration, back in their community, they are eligible to re-register and vote. So when somebody says, I don't know if I'm eligible, you don't have to say to them, oh, were you previously convicted of a felony? But you might mention a few things, like you might say, well, to register to vote, you need to be a citizen, you need to be 18 years of age. If somebody was convicted of a felony, but they're now out, they can vote. So kind of in a stream of things, get that in there to get that person to understand their right to vote. Interestingly, people who are presently incarcerated, but are awaiting trial or are being detained, if they're citizens and they meet all the other requirements, they are eligible to vote from jail. They would have to do, obviously, a mail-in ballot, but they are eligible to vote. So that's very important to know. If somebody says, oh, I don't know, I used to be registered, but I'm not sure, I haven't voted in a while, we can say to that person, let me help you. Let's go to vote.nyc and let's check the status of your registration. And that's very simple. You simply put in their name, their birth date, their address, and it will pop up and tell them their status. Yes, they're registered, or no, they're not. Now, sometimes it'll pop up, it'll say inactive. Someone who's inactive is technically still a registered voter, but they need to re-register because they're not going to pop up in the poll book. So we want them to re-register. Somebody might say, I'm in a hurry, I'm in a rush. I can't possibly take the time now to register to vote. Well, I've got my clipboard. Let me walk with you for a minute and help you fill in the form. Try not, although sometimes you don't have a choice, try not to just hand people the form, because, we know what happens, right? It gets shoved in the bag, it gets shoved in the purse, and then it never sees the light of day. So the more you can encourage people to do this in front of you, the better. If the person really, really, really wants to take one and run, okay, fine. But let's try to encourage them to stop, take a minute, and fill in the form so that we know that they're a registered voter. Then we have other voters that we have to talk to, potential voters. And many of these people, and I'm sure you know some, and I'm sure you've encountered folks like this, the folks who really are feeling very frustrated and they're feeling very negative, they're feeling very disenfranchised, they're feeling that their vote and their voice just doesn't seem to matter right now. And we need to find a way to reach these folks because their voice is important and their vote really, really does matter. And what we need to do is be very sensitive and really actively listen and be empathetic. Their feelings come from very, very deep inside. And when somebody says things like, my vote doesn't matter, I don't count, that's a deep personal feeling. And we can't say to them, oh, no, it doesn't. You're fine. No, that's not going to help them. We need to respond in a way that's empathetic and hears them. So when somebody says the system is rigged, why should I even do this? To say, well, you're right. The system seems like it's rigged. But when we vote, we change that because the more of us who vote, the more power we have. When people say, oh yeah, politicians are all crooks and criminals, well, then let's vote to get them out of office. It's all about the active voice of let's vote. When somebody says my vote doesn't make a difference, well, if you don't vote, you're right. When you don't vote, you're not using your voice. You're stifling your voice. When you use your voice and you vote, that makes a difference. So to be empathetic, we may not get them this time. They may walk away from us, but every now and then you're gonna break through and somebody is gonna listen to you and you're gonna be able to have this conversation and they're going to come around. And that's what we want. That's what we want, is that feeling of we are here to help you elevate your voice. And I frequently say that. I'll say, we want you to use your voice. And the way you can use your voice in our system, as flawed as our system might be, but the way you can use your voice is by voting. And, you could even use an anecdote. For example, one person once said to me, think about this. Almost every community in New York has a senior center. Why is that? Well, senior citizens vote. And so their city council person and their elected officials are responsive to that because they vote. How many communities have teen centers? Not that many. Again, who's voting? People who vote get heard. So we have to be the ones who get heard. And that's what we have to encourage people to do. This is the hard part. This is the hard part. But we want to really work at this to really take the time to empathize and listen and not deny them that feeling, because that feeling is there and it's very, very powerful. So let's take a few minutes and look at the actual voter registration form so that you can really see what it's about. It's actually very, very straightforward. We're having a little bit of trouble switching things in Zoom. So I'm going to walk you through it. Very simple, very easy way, just by telling you what's there. The most important thing when a person starts filling in the form, and I'm just holding it up here just to show you the general idea that's very short. The top section is basically the requirements. And as I've mentioned, citizenship and being 18 years of age and living in your community for 30 days before the election. That's pretty much it. I mean, there's a couple other things like being found, if you were found to be mentally incompetent, you can't vote. But for the most part, we're looking at citizenship, being 18 years of age, living here for 30 days or 30 days before the election. Now, we never say to a person, oh, are you a citizen? What we do is hold up the form, kind of point to that section of the form and say to the person, oh, are you an eligible voter? Take a look here. And then they can say, oh, no, no, thank you, I'm not. Or they could say, yes, I am. And then we can continue. And then the questions are very straightforward. Obviously, their name. Now, the one little tricky part here is they have to use their best handwriting, because this form, if they're doing it in the paper form rather than the online version, it has to be legible because the Board of Elections has to be able to tell the difference between an O and a Q or an L and an I. So you want to watch them while they're filling in the form. And if their handwriting is like chicken scratchings, you can actually do this part of the form for them. And you could say to them, would you like me to help you? My handwriting is pretty good. And you can actually help them with this top section of the form. So their name, their birth date, which of course will indicate that they're old enough, a contact information. So either their phone number or an email or both. Gender is asked for on the form, but it is now optional. New New York state law. A person does not need to indicate their gender. If they choose to, it's self-selecting. So they'll just put down whatever gender they want. We are totally neutral, or they could choose to leave it blank. Totally up to them. Then they're going to fill in their address. Very straightforward. Where do you live? Where are you represented? And this is literally where they put their head down on their pillow when they go to sleep. Now, interestingly, there are a couple of situations that you might face that you might have to have conversation with the registering voter about this. For example, let's say it's a young person who lives with one parent a few days a week and the other parent a few days a week. That person can say, well, my home is at this address. Then that's what you do. That's your home. A person who is homeless, a person who does not have a home and is living, on their cousin's couch, then that's home. That's where they're going to be voting from. That's where they're going to be represented. If a person is homeless living on the street, that street corner becomes their address. And that would be what they would write on this form. The other situation that you might face, although this is, the person may not express it this way, if a person is being protected from domestic violence, that person is living in a protected housing. They are not going to want to put their address down because your voter registration address is public information. That person goes to the Board of Elections and registers to vote there in a safe way and is allowed to vote safely without revealing their address. So if a person says to you, I'm afraid to put my address down, you can say to them, you can still register to vote. Go to the Board of Elections and you can give them the address. The address is right on the back of the form and send them there so that they can be a voter also. So that's very important. Now, also on the form below the address is a section that says address where you receive mail. Most people, you're going to leave that blank because most people get their mail at home and they don't have to rewrite their home address. But in some situations, so the situation that I gave about the homeless person who's living on the street, they might get their mail at a shelter, or they might get their mail at a church. If a person is, living on a cousin's couch, they might get their mail at a different location. So that's the only situation when a person needs to fill in that section separately. Then the next section after that is only for people who have previously voted. So somebody who is re-registering because they moved or they changed their name, maybe they got married or divorced or changed their name for some other reason, they would fill in the section that says voting history. And it's simply, have you voted before, yes or no? And if so, when? If you can remember. If you can't remember, it's okay. You can leave that blank. And then for the previous voter, they want to know what their name was before, their old name, or what their old address was. So that's what they fill in on that section of the form. Very straightforward. Then we get to the section about ID. Now, New York State is a non-voter ID state, which means we don't need to start flashing all kinds of identification. All we need is either a New York State driver's license or the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. That's it. And believe me, as you all know, that's all they need to verify who we are. So that information. So it's either your New York State driver's license, and they would just write that number on the form, or the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. Now, interestingly, a lot of young people don't know the last 4 digits of their Social Security number because they don't use it. So we encourage them. Well, who would know? Can you call your mom? Can you check a lot of them have student portals for school, and their portal will have the last 4 digits of their social. So try to encourage them, let's try to find those last 4 digits of your social if you don't know them. Let's try to call home. Let's try, check your portal. If they truly, truly, truly cannot find that last 4 digits and they do not have a New York State driver's license, that's okay. They can still register to vote. They're going to check the box that says, I do not have that information. And the only thing will be that when they actually do go vote for the first time, they're going to have to bring some ID. That's the only time. And the ID, if you look on what's on the screen right now, you can see all they need to do. And it can be a bank statement, a utility bill, a paycheck stub, anything that has your name and your address. That's going to verify when you go and vote. Otherwise, you don't need any other ID when you show up at the poll site. And that's important for people to know. Okay, so then comes the next section, political party affiliation. Now, this is a really great opportunity for conversation because so many people right now are very negative feeling about political parties. And here's the deal in New York that we have to get people to understand. New York State is a closed primary state, which means if you are not a member of one of the major political parties, you don't get to vote in the primary. You can vote in the general election, no problem, but you cannot vote in a primary in New York State unless you are a member of the political party holding that primary. Now, when we talk about your voting action plan and we talk about getting people to use their voice, think about it. In New York City, the primary is where it all happens. And you're elevating your voice when you vote in the primary. And we want people to understand that. You're not marrying the political party. You're joining the political party to elevate your own voice so that you, so that you have more impact in deciding who's going to run in the general election. And you can use the example, last election cycle with the mayor, there were something like 13 Democrats running on that Democratic Party line to have the privilege of running in the general election. And so to use your voice in the primary is a very, very powerful weapon. And we want people to understand how powerful your voice is in New York when you vote in primaries. So we say all that and then show them that section and have them choose a political party. And again, we're totally nonpartisan. Whatever party they select is their party. If they really, really, really don't want to be in a party, there's a box that says no party. But again, we want to encourage them. Remember, if you're not picking a political party, you're not going to be eligible to vote in a primary. You're good for November. That's a general election, but you're not going to be able to vote in a primary. So we really try to drive that home because we want to elevate the number of people who are eligible to vote in a primary. So after the person fills in the form, the last step of the form, I should say there, they must sign and date. Very, very important. It will not be valid without their signature and date. So technically, if a person is having difficulty writing, you can do the top part of the form in your handwriting, but then you must hand it back to them. They must sign it. And it is their, whatever their signature is. If their signature is an X or a scribble or the neatest fourth grade cursive you've ever seen, it doesn't matter. It's their signature and they must date it for the date that they are filling in the form. And then the form is complete. Now, in addition to that, I'm just going to very briefly share with you, there is a flap on the paper form. This flap is from Live On New York, which is the organization that manages the organ donor registry. It is a part of the voter registration form because being an organ donor, a registered member for organ donation, is also civically responsible to be able to be a part of your community who can help somebody who needs a kidney or another organ after our passing is a very, very powerful message. A lot of people, there's kind of a yuck factor, and we understand that. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we want to suggest to people that we want to be civically engaged in our communities. And an additional way to do that is to become a part of the organ donor registry. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there that, they're going to let you die so that they can get your organs. I mean, that's nonsense. But we really, but we really want to encourage people that this is something they can do to help their community. And it's right on the form. If they choose not to do it, that's fine. Just tuck it under and it can go in blank just like this. Okay, so it's just another way to encourage people to show involvement in their community. Meanwhile, they finished the form, they've signed, they've dated it, you've checked it to make sure it's all done correctly and it's legible. It's time to celebrate. You want to make sure that the voter understands that this is step one. This is step one of your voting action plan. And now let's get you thinking about, do you know where you're going to vote? Do you know what method you're going to do? All the things we've talked about this evening. And to remind the voter that we will take care of mailing this, and we will mail them all to the Board of Elections or hand deliver them, depending where you are, and that they will receive confirmation from the Board of Elections that they are a registered voter, and they can check their status again at vote.nyc to make sure that they are now an active voter, and to praise them. And this is wonderful. You're now ready to vote. Let's make sure you have your plan. When everything is done and you're collecting and organizing them, you're going to notice that if you're using the paper forms, which of course we'll be using, there's a yellow flap here, fold it over, and you're going to need to put a little piece of tape because this is not sticky enough. So you put a little piece of tape on it, and then you actually deliver them to either the Board of Elections, or again, you can bring them right. I would not put them in a public mailbox. Bring them right to a post office if you can't deliver them directly to the Board of Elections. So to wrap up, in conclusion, John Lewis, of course, the amazing civil rights activist and congressman who we lost a couple years ago, he said, never give up, never give in, never give out. Keep the faith and keep your eyes on the prize. Each and every vote matters. Do your part and vote like you've never voted before. Believe in the power of love, and together we will build the beloved community here in America. Thank you all so much. And we can, I think, stop the recording and let's take a look at if we have any questions.
This was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so